This is a Viva PR podcast.
So once we'd explained it to the clients, some of them hadn't heard of employee-owned businesses, so they were intrigued as to what it was. Our clients love it. They really enjoy the fact that now that we are employee-owned, we're all aligned to the same common goal. You definitely can't do like one suits all. That doesn't work. I don't think you can go into it if it's not for the people that you're doing it for.
In January 2024, my agency Viva became our agency Viva. I sold my shares to set up an employee ownership trust. So what has this got to do with a PR and communications podcast? Well, for one thing, setting up an EOT is a growing trend for agencies in our sector. But more pertinently, communication with colleagues, suppliers and customers is crucial to the success of the transformation. While we were going through the process, we spoke to other firms about the do's and the don'ts, which is how we came to be introduced to today's podcast, Caroline Noblett, and the leadership team from Granby Marketing. They were 12 months ahead of us on the journey, and they were very kind in the insights that they shared from their experience. It's a great story of how to bring people with you when you're going through a big change. So, without further ado, let's crack on. So, some listeners out there might not have heard of Granby. So, in a nutshell, can you tell us what it is you do as a firm?
Yes, so we're based in Blackburn. We're a fulfilments and logistics business offering core services that are third-party logistics, contract packing, promotional marketing, and we work across public and private sector markets.
So I mentioned in my intro some of the brands that you work with. That was just a couple of names. Can you fill us in on a couple more? That
we call ourselves small but mighty. So I think we've worked with some huge brands and are very privileged to have done so. One of the ones that's coming to mind to kind of show what can come out of Blackburn is we supported with the Office for National Statistics census when that was done in 2021. I think it was. Now it was done. So we was helping the field agents with all of their materials that they needed for the people obviously coming knocking on your doors to kind of complete the census. So yeah, we kind of, the ones that's in the background, I think we describe it as the unsexy part of logistics that we do, but it's something different every day and it's a really good place to be.
And tell us a little bit about your career and your journey up through the ranks and becoming MD.
Accounting's my background. I'm an accountant. I came to Granby in 2018, started there as the head of finance. Whilst I've been at Granby, my roles have changed a little bit. So then after head of finance, it turned into director of people and finance. Putting people first in that was a natural thing that we decided to do on purpose. And I think with the people of finance role, it then developed into succession planning for Joe, who was the managing director. And then part of the employee-owned, when we became employee-owned, that's when I then became managing director.
So obviously you and I are both familiar with the idea of employee-owned trust. Can you explain what it is and why it's a good thing to do from a business perspective?
So we did employee-owned, so it's where then obviously you can depend on what shares you want to give. We went 100% employee-owned, so Jo sold 100% of her shares to the trust. The employees didn't have to put in like any contribution. I think that's one of the common misconceptions of it. So our employees now, 100% of the trust, so the shares are held in the trust. We did that because, Jo did that from wanting to do her exit strategy. She wanted the lasting legacy of Granby to continue, but didn't particularly, I think she called them speed dating, if you've heard Jo speak a few places. She'd done speed dating with bigger logistical businesses that could have bought Granby, but she was worried about whether or not we'd just be absorbed into that and then Granby and Blackburn wouldn't exist anymore. So it didn't fit right with her. Jo then, while speaking to our advisors, was told about an employee-owned company. She'd not really thought of it, heard of it. And it was something then that it started ticking all the boxes for Jo to be thinking, well, yeah, that's the reason why I want to do it. That's another reason. So that was the reason that we went down it. It's kind of to create the lasting legacy for Granby and for the employees as well.
That kind of resonates with me. I've spent 22 years building up Viva.
Yes.
And obviously I ain't getting any young. My birth certificate has stayed exactly the same. So when I was looking at, what does the future hold, and somebody started talking to me about it was our accountancy practice that started talking to us about employee ownership trusts. All of that was kind of noise and jargon and acronyms. But that idea that the legacy that I'd built up would live on, and that the people who have been on the journey with me would be looked after because they'd have the control. Yeah. That was a really big selling point for me before it came to the kind of like the cold business numbers side of things.
Yeah, and I think
it was that real hearts and minds thing that I really loved about it.
Definitely, and that right. So there was obviously there's benefits as well from like tax perspectives and things like that. But I think for Jo, and when she was, and I'm not speaking for Jo, but I've heard her speak about this many times now, that wasn't the reason, it was the people piece around it. Yeah. And I think that was started where I mentioned before about how my job title was Director of People and Finance. There was a reason why people went first. And I think that's just been the way that Granby is. And so it kind of, the people was the reason why EOT was so important.
So when I was looking around and speaking to people about EOT and going down this road, one of the things that people would hammer home to me all the time was you've got to get the communications right. You've got to get the communications right with your team first and foremost, and then you've got to get your communications right externally. Thinking about that internal messaging and so on to the internal stakeholders, did you find that emphasis on being clear and communicating internally was important?
Yeah, it definitely was. I remember even from different stages when we were being advised from our lawyers and then the financial advisors as well, it was all around the focus of making sure the communication's done correctly into the business. It was a huge transaction that was ultimately going to be happening. But for the employees, we sat with them to explain this is the route that we've decided to go down. These were our options, but we decided to go employee-owned trust route first of all. And I think it was just keeping them updated along the journey for them. Ultimately for them, nothing was changing. Like I said, they didn't have to buy any shares, so it wasn't an investment for them or anything. I think it was trying to educate them. And Jo really played it down where I kept trying to make them realise that the way that Jo was doing it, and especially that it was done on deferred consideration as well, so we didn't pay Jo the full, obviously, sales value for the company on day one, that was creating to make sure that Granby can continue. So I don't think some of the things resonated with them, so they understood there was a change in ownership, but I don't think the full impact of the actual transaction did make sense to them. So I think it's trying to just explain that journey along the route with them. Yeah. But there was just lots of touch points with them as the transaction was going along, just to say this is now where we're up to. But then the day that it was all signed, there was, I think, where everyone thought there might be some magical moment, it was just like another piece of paper that was signed and business continued as usual.
In essence, that's the point, isn't it? That it is business as usual and that you're creating that. Were there any kind of missteps along the way or challenges along the way or questions, curveball questions that came your way from the team internally?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think you got just more inquisitive questions as to say, like, well, what does this actually mean? And when we were trying to explain to them about how you can be involved in the profit share schemes on the back of them, then questions were raised around that, and trying to understand, well, when would we get that? So I think it's then trying to then rein people in a little bit to say, look, I've tried to explain to you about like Jo's deferred consideration. We need to do all of that first because that's like the cash impact. And then obviously the profit share can come. I'm trying to think of what the phrase is called when a lot of EOTs call it. It's like Freedom Day, I think it's something like that along the lines, isn't it? So once that comes, that's when we can reap the benefits from that as a team. So I don't think there was many curveballs as such. I think it was just more, some were interested more than others as well, which I thought was interesting, but I think you would get that anywhere. We tried to do a blanket discussion with people, and you'd get some people more included in the conversations and others not really.
We'll come back to that internal dialogue, but when you announced this to the outside world, how did that land? And did you give any special thought on how you were going to position it and explain Jo's departure and what it would mean to your customer
Yeah,
base?
Definitely. So when we were speaking with our clients, first and foremost about what was going to happen, it was more along the angle of like the succession planning of Granby. Yes, it was going to be Jo's been there, I think it was 23, 24 years now that Jo's been around. So for the clients, it could have been quite an unnerving time, but We'd planned ahead enough, so we knew this was coming up. So I'd then started being introduced more into meetings with Jo so they could start to get to see my face. And I think it was just explaining that the purpose of it was to create a lasting legacy. To back that up, we've got the succession plannings throughout the business now that we was sorting out and getting the wheels moving with those things. So once we'd explained it to the clients, some of them hadn't heard of employee-owned businesses, so they were intrigued as to what it was. And others, it was just more the reassurance piece for them.
It's given you a point of difference as well, I guess,
Yeah.
To kind of push the business on. Do you think it's been a positive overall in that external market?
Massively. Our clients love it. I think when we speak to our clients, they really enjoy the fact that then, now that we are employee-owned, we're all aligned to the same common goal. So we all want the business to do well. So knowing to do that, it needs the quality of the service. So ultimately, the clients are benefiting from it as well, not just the employees. So they're really interested in that. We share with them that one of our strategic goals is people over profit. And so they like to see that we're investing in our teams, training, development, whichever different ways it needs to be. And again, ultimately, that then goes back to a benefit for the clients. So it's been a huge positive, and I think our clients like it as a talking point with us.
How long is it since you became an EOT?
We became employee-owned in September 22.
So in that time, has anything changed in the way you talk to the team about it internally, from that first go live date, say?
We've started an employee-owned forum, so just trying to get different communication channels with the team. And so they now meet, they were meeting monthly, but then that was a bit of an overkill, we found. So now it's gone to quarterly. And they're kind of bringing together different ideas, suggestions, and trying to kind of explain to them that ultimately, if they're wanting the profit share from it, there's little things that they could be doing that could influence that. So the forum's quite a good one.
So that's a good two-way street by the sound
Yeah.
of it, that you can get a message across in a way that's not seen as us and them.
Yeah, definitely. I think with the other internal communications, because we're like a logistics business, it's primarily warehousing as well. So I'd probably say 80% of our employees don't have access to like emails, so they're not sat at a computer. So it's not just comms through emails and things like that. We've now got digital signage around the site, so we put lots of different things up there for them to keep up to date with, whether it's client updates or performance or things like that. That's gone down really well. Our employees are liking to see that. And I think it's just trying to keep the communication channels open. We've invested a lot more this year on training for our line managers, obviously because that's the way that communication can be helped from both ways, so from the leadership team down or from the employees back to the leadership team. So yeah, we've thought of different things and it's just trial and error.
A lot of businesses, when we're working on the internal comm side, the challenge that you've articulated there about not everybody sat behind a desk and a computer screen, so a mouse mat and a poster is not going to work for those people. What have been some of the challenges about getting out and about to get that message landing in the warehouse?
I think it's just making sure that the communication, if it's something, and we've not really had many instances so far where it's anything other than business as usual. I think that's one of the biggest things that we've come across, where at the start, I think when people were getting a little bit confused that they thought that they possibly had control or a bigger input on the day-to-day kind of things, where really with the employee owned, when it was set up at the start, it was around kind of the bigger transactions that you would do the votes on, for example. So if and when the time comes that we decided to sell Granby, we would do an employee vote and things like that. It's not around just the day-to-day. So I had to, at the start of this year, I rewrote all job descriptions and things to kind of put accountable, responsible. So people understood that it's, yes, your voice is heard and it's really important, but it can't be in every single decision that needs to be made, or else it won't work.
Yeah, you've not suddenly turned into a democracy overnight, where every conversation requires 85% of employees.
And I think at first that kind of, so in hindsight, when you asked the question earlier about what could we have done differently, that probably was a lesson learned, to say, actually, yes, the communications decisions are, yes, all valid, but it's business as usual, and the job roles that we're all in are equally as important, but you've still got your own decision making within that job role. So yeah, that's probably been the biggest challenge.
And how has the culture within the business changed?
I wouldn't say it has, and I think that's one of the important things, that if people speak to me about becoming employee owned, I would say to make sure that you feel you've got that culture ahead of going into it. I think if you went into it without having things in place and the culture already there, where I kind of say I don't feel like anything has changed, I think you would probably have a lot of things that you'd be thinking, oh no, maybe we shouldn't have done this. But no, I think we got to the point, and I felt like a lot of the employees did, that again after the day that we signed, we expected some fireworks, something, and it was just another day. And it's kind of felt like that since, just the odd little teething things. But other than that, yeah, it's still the same.
So what kinds of culture do you think are ideal for this process?
Definitely a business that is people focused. I don't think you can go into it if it's not for the people that you're doing it for. I think it needs to be a company that's collaborative amongst the teams as well, where the communication's already there. And for us as well, I think Joe worked to get quite a strong leadership team, so I'm fortunate to work with a brilliant team around me that want to do the strategic thinking as well. So it's kind of that you've got to have things set up, I think, in place before you go into it. I think it'd be difficult to become employee-owned and then try to change quite a lot of things.
What does the decision-making process look like? Where do you get the staff involved? Where's the line that you draw? Where do you think that they don't need to know this?
I try to make sure that they know most things, to be honest. We meet quarterly as an employee-owned trust, and we've got an independent chair on there as well with an employee representative. So we do meet quarterly. We discuss like the headline agenda points that need to be onto there. The employee forum goes into that. I think the one area that's always difficult around the communications is the financial performance. Coming from an accounting background, like I've said, numbers is the dangerous thing. I think you can, if you don't understand accounts, you can misinterpret them and completely go off on a tangent with them. And especially for Granby, we're quite seasonal.
Yeah.
So I feel like you could look at our accounts at one point in the year and it could be a completely different picture of what the forecasted outcome is going to be at the end. So financial's been the area that I've struggled the most as to what level of detail am I meant to share. I've spoke to the employees to kind of see what is it that you are wanting. So for going into next year, that I can make sure that I'm giving the right details. And they are just saying they just more want headline figures. But yeah, financials has been the most difficult, I think.
I guess that's because a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yes.
In that sense, that we're not all blessed with that accountancy brain where you can look at a set of figures and it paints a particular picture. You're blessed in that sense, but then you've got to translate that to people who
to non-financial as well. So that's difficult. But we've always communicated any kind of client updates, for example, or any client wins. So they would now go onto the screens kind of things. If there's any client visits coming, they get to go up on the boards. Any training, anyone who's passed training, birthdays, anything that you can think of can go onto there. So I do think the trickiest part is the financial element to it.
And I guess getting around that is a thing that you've had to learn over the last 18 months.
Yeah, and I think we do quite a few employee surveys to kind of see what more could we be doing? Are you interested in knowing anything else? How often do you want to hear from me? Because I don't want overkill at the same time. And we found that they mostly just want quarterly updates, which is completely fine. And I think it's more focused around the actual team conversations and making sure that the team levels are doing well, rather than the actual conversations from myself as such on quarterly updates.
So what would you say is the secret to a good culture or a satisfied working environment?
I don't think there is a secret, is there? I think one thing I've learnt is you definitely can't do like one suits all. That doesn't work. And I think at first we was quite thought that if we did something, we had to make it be for everybody or else we weren't going to do it.
Yeah.
Quickly learnt along the way that's not the case. We can put different things out there and see who wants to take part and who doesn't, and don't take offence if other people don't. So I think that's one learning that we've had. Another secret, I would say, one thing I want to focus on more next year is around the more psychological safety element to your employees. So making sure that the trust is there, the communication's there, the collaboration's there. Because I feel if those elements are all there, the conversation should flow easily, which again will help the culture. You've
been on a journey yourself in terms of going from 2018 at the people and finance role to MD. How different do you think this would have been if you'd not gone down the EOT route? If we hadn't have gone down the EOT route, I still don't think that Joe would have sold to another logistical businesses. It didn't fit right with us. So I don't know whether if that conversation wouldn't have happened when it did,
the transaction just wouldn't have happened. So I feel Jo would have possibly then had to still step back slowly and do her exit strategy as she's wanted to do, but it would have just been possibly at a slower pace than it has been done until she would have stumbled across EOT.
And for you to step up
Yes.
into the management role, is there anything that you do differently?
No, I've really enjoyed the way that we've done the succession planning route. So as I said, when we knew that it was going to happen from September 22, probably from 2021, the back end of that, as a board, we were having discussions about the succession planning, and obviously especially for the managing director role. And then so when it was decided that obviously I was going to go for it, we'd done quite a lot of introducing me to things. So I've had the time. Jo was then still working full time. After the transaction happened in 22, Jo reduced the time, and she's reduced it slightly more so. So I feel like I've had the opportunity to learn on the job with Jo still there as the support. So that's actually worked really well, that element to it. From both parts, I think one for Jo to be letting go, because obviously you'll probably feel it yourself if you've had your business for that long. But also for me, I always say I wouldn't have gone to apply for another managing director job somewhere else. I feel like I've had the opportunity to grow into it whilst on this journey of EOT as well.
What does the future hold for Granby, and what are you looking forward to most?
Definitely looking down how we continue to grow as a business. And one of the main focus that we're going down is looking at acquisitions as well. Staying small but mighty, but looking for other SMEs as well so we can be stronger together. That's my main focus. Keeping the strategy momentum going that we've got, so keeping with the people over profit, making sure that we can continue to meet Jo's deferred consideration, and ultimately the 5-year plan is to have paid off that to get to the Freedom Day for employee owned.
That sounds like a fantastic place to leave things, but thanks so much, Caroline. It's been illuminating. It's brilliant to share the EOT magic with other people. And when we were going down this route, you were really generous with your time and pointed out the do's and don'ts. So I'm sure that door's always open for anyone else as well.
And I feel that's what you find. I think with employee-owned businesses, they are really supportive of another employee-owned business, regardless of what sector it's from. I found that as we obviously invited you to Granby, I was invited to somewhere else as well. So it's definitely something that is in the EOT waters, I think.
Excellent. Well, let's have a brew. Cheers. Thanks for listening to PR in the Real World. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the podcast and leave us a quick review. Your support really helps spread the word and reach more marketing and PR professionals just like you. And don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues or anyone who'd benefit from the insights we share. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for more tips, strategies and real world stories from the PR frontlines.